Okay, hello and welcome everyone. I'm Jason Gumbert from MSDynamicsWorld.com, and we're here for a new session all about year-end reporting and Affordable Care Act compliance. We're joined today by Dan Doolin of Integrity Data. It's great to have him on the line. He's a first-time presenter for us. And as we get started, Dan's going to bring up his screen, which I believe is offline now. And I want to add that we do invite you in the audience to ask questions during today's session. Dan will be saving questions for the end of the presentation, but please do enter them anytime. And with that, I am going to hand things over to Dan to get started. Dan, are you there?
Yep, awesome. Thank you, Jason. I appreciate it. Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining our webinar today. We're happy to take the time to talk to you about Affordable Care Act compliance. It's a pretty hot topic, as you well know, and so what we want to do is share a lot of great information with you today on really what you need to understand from an Affordable Care Act perspective as an employer, and then, of course, how to get through that process. So let's go ahead and walk through some slides, and let's begin with our introduction or our agenda, which first topic is, of course, an introduction. We're going to spend just a minute talking about who Integrity Data is if you're not familiar with us. But then we're going to spend a lot of time talking about the ACA employer mandate. As an employer, what do you need to know and what do you need to do? The reason for that, and we're going to spend a lot of time on that, is there's still a lot of organizations out there that really don't have a good understanding of what it is they need to do. And so we're going to spend some time talking about that. And we're going to talk about the filing deadlines related to Affordable Care Act compliance. We're going to talk about what you need to know if you're not prepared. Introduce the P word, the penalty word, and talk about those. Action items for ACA compliance. So how do you start breaking down what it is that you need to do and what type of organization that you are? We're going to walk through Integrity Data's ACA compliance solution and how you can do that fuss-free, as the webinar is entitled, and talk about the benefits of that solution. And of course, at the end, we'll have time for questions and answers. There's always a lot of questions about this topic, and we'll be happy to answer those at the end. As Jason said, if you can type those questions into the question box on the WebEx, then we'll certainly walk through those at the end of our webinar today. I'm going to try to do my best to save about 15 minutes for that. All right, let's go ahead and jump into things here. Just a quick introduction about Integrity Data, if you're not familiar with us. We've been in business since 1996, so going on 20 years. There are more than 7,500 organizations worldwide that utilize our technology to improve their payroll and their human resources processes. So that's an area that we focus on. For those of you that are familiar with Dynamics GP, we've focused heavily in that space with those particular customers in the mid-market, and have worked very closely with Microsoft to add additional features to Dynamics GP payroll and human resources, as well as some other areas of the system. So that's a system we're most familiar with. We've been immersed in ACA compliance since 2012, which seems like a long time, and it is kind of a long time in ACA terms, since a lot of you are just trying to get immersed in it as we speak. A little bit more detail about that immersion, if you will, is that we really started in January 2012 working with a restaurant organization that was really trying to get a good handle on their risk assessment and risk management related to providing coverage to newly eligible employees. And as you can see, as we've progressed, developing a product, having that product be commercial release, developing 1095Cs, being able to produce those even at the end of last year, even before the draft was finalized. So we've been on the curve, if not a little bit ahead of the curve, in getting product information out. We see adoption being a little bit behind the curve, but we'll talk about that in a few minutes. Right, the ACA compliance burden on employers. So all of you, assumably, are employers, and as you think about Affordable Care Act, there's really two sides of it from an individual point of view. There's the individual mandate that the mandate is that each of us have to have health insurance or be covered by health insurance. We have to report that on our tax forms. As employers, our responsibility is to provide, I always say the wrong word there, is to offer affordable coverage to eligible employees. So provide the option for the employee to select coverage through you as their employer. So there's 3 key words there that I want you to remember because they're really key to Affordable Care Act compliance. First word is offer, second word is affordable, and the third word is eligible. Okay, and we're going to talk about what all that means. A lot of the focus, as you all are looking towards compliance and year end, a lot of the focus is on the generation of the IRS forms that demonstrate your compliance with the Affordable Care Act. A lot of focus on the Form 1095-C and its transmittal form, the 1094-C that need to be generated, and the 1095-C, of course, going to the employees, the 1094-C, of course, going to the IRS. Now, the 1095-C is a reflection of your monthly activities as an employer and whether or not you've offered coverage and measured employees and so on throughout the year. A lot of the focus is on the compliance as of 1/1/2016 to produce the reports, which is a little bit misleading because the compliance date is really 1/1/2015. So not to really get too harsh, but if you're not compliant yet, if you think of yourself as being six weeks ahead of schedule, you're really 11 and a half months behind schedule, or 10 and a half months behind schedule, because that compliance date being 1/1/2015. If you have over 100 FTEs from an ACA point of view, you're already in a penalty phase. Again, not to be too harsh. It's Friday. We want to have a good Friday, so I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but I want you to understand the urgency that exists in the current situation, which is why you're here, and that's good. So the 1095-C is a reflection of your activities or potential lack of activities as far as offering that affordable coverage to eligible employees throughout the year. Okay, and you need to report on that. We're going to talk more about those reports and the deadlines and things that go with it. All right, let's talk about what you need to do as an employer and when, and we'll keep getting into details as we go through this. From an annual point of view, you need to provide a 1095-C to all ACA-defined full-time employees, and we'll talk about what full-time employees are. You need to file the 1094-C, the transmittal form, to the IRS. You also need to determine your ALE status. Are you an applicable large employer? Essentially, if you have more than 50 FTEs, you're an applicable large employer, and you need to be compliant. On a monthly basis, you need to calculate employee eligibility to determine if you need to offer that employee or present them with an offer of coverage. And we'll talk about the options for doing that and how you can work through those. Track the cost associated with the coverage offered, and of course track affordability. And continuously, you must track every employee's hours of service. Okay, a key word there is service. Service means not only hours that the employee works, but also jury duty, military deployment, FMLA, leave of absence, vacation, holiday, illness, and incapacity or layoff. So I had this conversation with a customer this morning, and the fact that they were not too fond of the idea of having to track all these additional types of hours for employees, and I certainly understand that. But that is what the Act indicates as part of the mandate. All right, who should produce Form 1095-C? I mentioned earlier that every employer with 50 or more full-time equivalents needs to be compliant. That's the definition of an applicable large employer. And when we get into the demonstration, we'll walk through that calculation so you know how to determine that. But every employer with 50 or more full-time equivalents must provide a 1095-C to their employees. Also, every employer who is self-insured, regardless of the number of employees. Okay, so when you get less than 50 employees on a self-insured organization, it's a little bit different in the form filing. But for all intents and purposes, 50 or more FTEs, you need to be compliant with the Affordable Care Act. Now, who gets Form 1095-C? And this is where we get into a little bit of the eligibility conversation. The best way to think about this is to say, well, any employee who is determined to be full-time or should have gotten an offer of coverage, or who does have coverage, needs to get a Form 1095-C. So how do we determine which employees are eligible for that offer of coverage? Well, there's two ways to measure really part-time employees. Full-time employees designated, their status is full-time. Those are kind of the easy ones. Got to offer them coverage, and so that's pretty straightforward. The ones that can cause the headaches are the part-time or variable hour employees, and there's two ways to measure them. You can use the monthly measurement method or the look-back measurement method. The monthly measurement method is such that you would look at the employee each month and determine whether or not that employee worked more than 130 hours in that specific month. If they did, then you would need to offer that employee coverage. Now, you don't have to offer coverage for very long, because in the next couple of months, that employee could go back down below 130 hours and you could take the offer of coverage away. There are certain time restrictions around that, but you could very easily get into a back and forth situation if you have any number of part-time employees. The look-back measurement method is a little bit different. It gives you the ability to look back over a longer period of time, typically we like to use 1 year, to determine if that employee averaged more than 130 hours in that given month or in that given year or period. And if they did average more than 130 hours per month within that period, then you would need to extend an offer to that employee for them to have insurance. If that employee did not average more than 130 hours per month in that given measurement period or look-back period, then you would not need to offer that coverage until you measure those employees again. So that's where you see every employee who exceeded 130 hours in any given month if you're using the monthly measurement method, or employees in a stability period, which means you've determined to be full-time, you've got to offer them coverage through a stability period. You need to provide those employees with a 1095-C as well. Okay. Also, if the employee is part-time but you're providing them with an insurance plan that's employer paid, then you also would provide a 1095-C. All right, so determining whether or not you need to comply, who gets a 1095-C. We'll get into a few more details as we continue through the webinar, but let's talk about the filing deadlines for producing the 1095-C and the 1094-C. So February 1st, 2016, Form 1095-C to employees goes along with the W-2 deadlines. The transmittal, Form 1094-C, goes to the IRS in paper by February 29th, 2016. If you e-file the Form 1094-C, that has to be in by March 31st, 2016. Now, if you have less than 250 eligible employees or less than 250 1095-Cs, you have a choice, paper or e-file. If you have more than 250 submissions, you don't have a choice, you're required to e-file. Okay? It's important to note that if you're utilizing Dynamics GP and you've upgraded to 2015, you're going to try to use it for ACA compliance. There's no capability for Dynamics GP to produce the file for the Form 1094-C. Okay, so I just want to point that out in case that's part of your strategy. All right, the bad news, or the worst news. The IRS is prepared to send penalty notices. Our compliance team attends the IRS calls. There is in no way the expression of any leniency or grace periods related to penalties from the IRS, especially the penalty for not filing. The IRS point of view is that we've delayed this for 2 years so that employers could get compliant. Now's the time. If you're not, you're going to pay. And that's kind of the bottom line. There's 3 penalties here. First of all, if you don't offer coverage to an eligible employee, the penalty is $173.67 per month per employee. Now, you do get a few of those freebies this year related to that particular penalty. This year, the number is 80. Next year, it goes to 30. The year after that, there's none. So if you have 100 employees that you should have offered coverage to, that you didn't offer coverage to, you'll only be penalized for 20 of them. If your offer of coverage is determined to be not affordable, then that penalty is $260.50 per month per employee. That process works a little bit differently in the fact that if the employee went to an exchange and got a subsidy, the IRS is going to look to see if that employee had other options, meaning if they got a subsidy but the employer offered affordable coverage, that employee is going to have to pay back that subsidy. But if they look at that situation and you were not offering affordable coverage, then you're going to be looking at this penalty. Now, the other penalty that we see getting a lot of organizations in trouble is the penalty for not filing. That penalty is $500 per form. So if you have 500 employees, 500 times $500 per form, that adds up to be a very large number, $250,000. And that's the penalty for not filing. So what we find is that, so yesterday I was at an event working with a bunch of utilities, and those organizations have traditionally offered good coverage to their employees through collective bargaining agreements, and it's affordable. And so when you look at the Affordable Care Act mandate, they're offering affordable coverage to their eligible employees. They're doing that. But they've got to get prepared for this filing requirement. So they still have to produce those 1095Cs. Even if they're compliant with the mandate to offer affordable coverage, if they don't report on that and demonstrate that fact, then they're subject to the $500 per required form filing penalty. Okay. Be aware, if you're an applicable large employer, over 50 FTEs, IRS reporting is not optional, and there's penalties attached for non-compliance. Automations needed to connect all the data points, and the fines, which will be significant, cannot be deducted as business expenses. All right, so the first action item is, and I'm going to fly through these next couple of slides, is to really think about what type of organization that you are. Are you part of the burden majority, which is kind of like the utilities I just mentioned, where they have a lot of offers of coverage, or they provide that coverage to employees or offer that coverage. It's good coverage. It's affordable. Workforce is stable, mostly full-time employees, not a lot of turnover. Their burden is that they now just have to report that. Okay. Then you get into the forced minority, organizations that traditionally haven't offered much health insurance. The workforce is defined by hourly workers with varying schedules, high turnover, lower wage workers. Think about a restaurant that has a lot of part-time employees. They never even thought about offering coverage to those part-time employees. Now those part-time employees need to be measured to determine if they become a full-time equivalent and need to be offered coverage. So the requirements end up being the same, but it's more work for the forced minority. The burden majority is already doing what they need to do. They just need to report on it. The forced minority needs to make sure that they're not missing anybody that's part-time but is averaging more than 130 hours per month, becoming eligible and potentially needing to be offered coverage. All right. So we've talked about the ACA employer mandate. How do we help? How can you get through this? Well, of course, we can help you do the heavy lifting. So let's talk about the fancy pie chart here. When you look at the top half of the pie chart, it's really about the solution that we provide. Penalty risk management, making sure you're catching those employees that become eligible, making sure that the insurance that you're offering to those employees is affordable. And then for the ones that are eligible, being able to produce a 1095C and the 1094C and be able to e-file that if you're over 250 submissions. Just to point out, there are not very many organizations that can produce an e-file that is compatible with the AIR system at the IRS. So when we passed our test a few weeks ago, there was less than a handful, and we consisted of 2 of them. So there's not very many that have successfully passed that test. If part of your strategy is, we're just going to create this file ourselves and submit that to the IRS, just being a little bit blunt, that's not a good strategy, okay? Because it's very difficult to do. And we spent several weeks with many people and with a large amount of insight into the IRS, being able to produce that file and pass the test. So our system will produce that file that you can then submit to the IRS for that e-filing. Okay, the bottom half of the pie chart is the how we do it. Very quickly, first of all, quick to deploy. No full HR implementation is required. If you're utilizing Dynamics GP, there is zero dependency on the ACA features within Dynamics GP to utilize our system. All we're dependent on are payroll transaction data and employee master data. If you're processing payroll in Dynamics GP, that's great. If you're processing payroll through ADP, that's fantastic. If you're using Dynamics SL, no problem. If you're using Dynamics AX, we can do that too. We've worked with customers that are using all kinds of different payroll systems, and you'll see how we upload that data into our system and are able to help them with their ACA compliance, regardless of what ERP system or what payroll system they're using. All right, our solution is a cloud-based solution, SaaS, cloud, web, whatever you want to call it. So when there are changes to the Affordable Care Act, which there are and which there will continue to be, you don't have to worry about installing an update. You don't have to install any software, which also helps with the quick deployment. It's all cloud-based, so we can update that as things change. In addition, you'll see some cool alerting and dashboard capabilities built into that. ACA Fluent support, it's very important. And we mentioned our team sitting in on the IRS calls. We have a compliance team that's part of our core team. They interpret that information, make it easy for us to understand, make it easy for you to understand, and of course make it easy for our support folks to understand. So as you have questions, we're not just going to be able to answer questions about the top part of the pie chart, but we're going to be able to answer those in addition to, in the context of your strategies and your questions related to compliance with the Affordable Care Act. All right, big question. How long does it take to implement? Because I think the magic number is 51 business days until that February 1st generation of the 1095-C deadline. So if, of course, every time you say countdown, all you can think of is the Geico commercial with the final countdown. So we kind of started doing that here. I think the number is 51. So anyway, there's your humor for the webinar. We're in the final countdown to ACA compliance. How long does it take to implement? Thankfully, not very long. Less than a day, typically in a few hours. So I helped partners that we work with. I just was traveling, met up with them, and we did basically an implementation in the hotel lobby, and we were up and running. And I think the number was an hour, and the time was an hour and 20 minutes, and that was after we fixed some of their data coming out of Dynamics GP. So pretty quickly, running reports very quickly and all that, and being able to access all the information. And that's because we're not dependent on the HR system. We're not dependent on the deployment isn't dependent on any other piece of software. It's just an ACA solution. It's not tied in with anything else. At this point in the game, you need to implement an ACA solution, and that's it. We can utilize the payroll data wherever that needs to come from and get it implemented and get you compliant. No other technical strings attached. All right, with that, let's go over and jump into a demonstration. And just as I do that, as you have questions, please feel free to put those into the question box, and we'll get to those in about 10 or 15 minutes. Okay. So welcome to Integrity Data's ACA Compliance and Reporting Solution. Of course, as you can see, it's on the interwebs here and in the clouds, hosted on Microsoft Azure. So all the security protocols are in place. So that's not a concern. Now, what you'll see initially is that you have a dashboard, which is providing you with quick business intelligence, if you want to use the term, key performance indicators, key indicators, whatever. right here at the top of the screen. So you can say, well, I've got 2 full-time employees without coverage, and you could drill down on that. 93% of the employees have been offered coverage. Or your FTEs, how many days are remaining in the current measurement period. In addition, along with that ACA Fluent support, you're also getting live feeds from our blog post. So Veterans Day the other day, we were posting some information about how the Affordable Care Act impacts veterans, or how you need to treat veterans from an employer point of view, and if they get included in your ALE determination, things of that nature. So you're getting a lot of good information here. In addition, getting live feeds from Twitter. Our ebook, I highly recommend it. It's just a quick 6-page covering the basics of Affordable Care Act compliance, much like we did in the initial parts of the webinar. Okay, so you get a lot of good information, a lot of links. So what you're getting here is information that's very relevant and very useful and very timely. As you hear things on the news about, golly, I heard something about an Affordable Care Act change in the budget deal last week or 2 weeks ago, maybe that means we don't have to be compliant anymore. Maybe our dreams have come true. Sorry, that isn't really what happened, but you can see what was included in that budget deal, and we've deciphered that information, put it into a blog, and of course, live feed into the system. This information is also available on our website as well, but you're getting it right here within your ACA solution. All right, let's walk through the process. I mentioned uploading data. If you're utilizing Dynamics GP, there will be a live connector in place early next year, so you won't have to worry about the upload process. The upload process is very straightforward. Some appreciate the upload process because it gives them the chance to review the data before they upload it. It's a very simple file format. Actually, I've got one here. Let's bring it up. This is just an Excel. This is a template that we use. We've got some SQL scripts that help pull the data out of Dynamics GP. You can pull that into Excel and then upload from there. Very straightforward, very not basic information, but it's employee master data and payroll transactions. The import process is built into the user interface and has data validation built into it. So if there's a problem, it's going to point that out and point out which row it's on, what the problem is, and have you fix that so that you don't end up with bad data and inaccurate reporting from an ACA point of view. Okay, so that's getting the data there. Once that's set up, we can go into the configuration. It's got all the company information that's here. Okay, if you've got multiple companies, that's fine. According to the Affordable Care Act, you'll need to aggregate that information across those companies and report on that. Got methods for doing that as well. Okay, setting up your measurement periods. Remember we talked about the look-back measurement period, or look-back measurement method, and defining that. This is the place where you make that definition, and then we'll run some reports according to this as well. So in this example, using a look-back measurement method, there are 3 steps to this. There's a standard measurement period, the administrative period, and the stability period. Okay, so the standard measurement period is the period of time over which you're looking back. See the term, look-back measurement? You're looking back at part-time employees to determine if they average more than 130 hours per month in that time frame. Okay, in this example, I have the standard measurement period set up from 10/1/2016 to 9/30/2017, 12 months. The administrative period is the period of time you have to perform that test and make offers of coverage. Think about that as the same time frame as your enrollment window. Okay. The stability period typically lines up with your plan year. So let's play out a scenario here. It's November. Let's say we're in our administrative period. We're running tests, looking at employee data over this amount of time in the standard measurement period. If an employee is determined to, a part-time employee is determined to average more than 130 hours per month through that year, so they've reached a ACA full-time equivalent status, then we need to offer that employee coverage through the stability period, okay, or that next plan year. Now, if that employee tests out at averaging less than 130 hours per month, we don't need to do anything with that employee until we run that test again 1 year from now. So that's why it's called the stability period. It helps just stabilize the offers, stabilize your activity, not have employees going on and off coverage, but it's a little bit more simple, especially if you have any number of part-time employees. Now, it's important to note that you would run this test against employees that work the entire period. For new hires, they're set up on an initial measurement period. So the initial measurement period, in this case, is 12 months. For the standard measurement period, administrative period is 1 month, and the stability period is 12 months. So if the employee gets hired 12 months from now, we run that same test to determine if they average more than 130 hours. If they did, we're going to offer them coverage. And we have to do that for 12 months. If they didn't, we don't do anything, and they fall into our standard testing process from that point forward. But that can become a monthly cycle that you get on of producing that report to see who's coming to the end of their 12-month initial measurement period. Okay, let's set up the information about our insurance plan that we're offering to employees and assign the ACA attributes. This is what's going to determine the information going on the 1095-C that we looked at. So, is it a qualifying offer? Yes or no? If it's not, does it provide minimum essential coverage, minimum value? Who does it cover? The start and end date? What safe harbor are we using for the affordability calculation? What's the employee only cost? Is that less than 9.56% of whatever safe harbor that you're using for the affordability calculation? The way that this breaks down is this information gets translated into a code that goes into line 14 of the 1095-C. The cost gets translated on the line 15 of the 1095-C, and then whether or not the employee's on coverage or not, or they've declined coverage but it's affordable under the whatever safe harbor, all that gets interpreted into a code on line 16 of the 1095-C. What's nice about an automated solution such as our solution is that you don't have to figure out the codes. There's a year-end process that will run at the end of the year, and based on the information that you've uploaded, we'll make that determination and place the correct codes on the 1095-C for you, and of course fill out the 1094-C for you to submit to the IRS. All right, let's take a look at some reports now. Okay, so let's look at our full-time equivalents, or full-time employee and equivalents report, and we'll do that for calendar year 2017 just to match up with the data. So this report is also the same report or same math that you would use to arrive at your ALE determination. Are you an applicable large employer? So here's how it works. Let's look at November. 28 designated full-time employees by status. Okay, those are easy. They're FTEs. Variable hour or seasonal employees that average more than 130 hours per month over the year. There are 15 of those. Variable hour employees or part-time employees that average less than 130 hours per month. And we'll look at all their hours. It's 8,305 hours. That number gets divided by 120. What's unique about 120? Nothing really. It's just what they stated in the Affordable Care Act. So that produces another 6-time full-time equivalents. So the total number here is 112. So even though there's only 28 full-time employees, and really, even when you go over 130, the number's 43 FTEs because of all the other all the other part-time employees who aren't even averaging more than 130, then that's going to push this organization over 50 and then even over 100 full-time equivalents. So they would need to be compliant with the Affordable Care Act. Okay, it's important to know how this calculation works. If you're in that range of 45 to 55, you'll want to know how this works because that'll determine your status going into next year, whether or not you need to be compliant. All right, let's look at a standard measurement report. I'll get this filled in and kind of explain what we're doing here. So, standard measurement period analysis, period ID going into 2018. So we're going to look over employee data for employees that were employed through the entire period of 10/1/16 to 9/30/2017. Now, the reason we're doing this is think about the fact that, okay, we're in an administrative period. I've got to run this report over these last 12 months, and it's going to tell me all the part-time employees that have averaged more than 130 hours per month and need to be offered coverage because they are now considered full-time from an ACA perspective. Okay, so let's look at a couple of examples here. My favorite, Bertie, part-time employee. Over that time frame, she worked 1,667.4 hours. That's more than 1,560, which is the threshold for 130 hours per month. So she's designated now as a full-time employee according to the ACA. So we'll need to offer Bertie coverage in that stability period from 1/1/2018 to 12/31/2018. Terry, part-time employee, worked 1,217 hours. Continues to be a part-time employee. Don't need to do anything with him. Look at a couple other examples here. Jamie, same situation, part-time employee, 1696.3. Full-time employee, need to offer coverage. Now, what you can do with this report, of course, you can print it, but you can also bring it into Excel. The advantage to taking it to Excel is that you can, let me bring this over on the monitor so you can see it, is that then you can start to apply filters and filter the data, because if you've got a lot of employees, you want to filter, okay, just show me the people that forecasted out as full-time so that you can do something about that and offer them coverage and so on. Okay. You can also bring this down as a PDF as well. All right, let's look at new hires. And you can run these reports anytime just to kind of see where you're at. And we'll see that when we look at the initial measurement period analysis for a new hire. I'm just going to run this as of sometime throughout the year. Let's just say it's 6/30/2017. So we're looking at new hires. And we really need to be concerned with the ones that have hit their 12 months. And those employees we could get through to a different report. At the end of 12 months, we need to make a decision on whether or not, we need the system to tell us whether or not we need to offer them coverage, and it will do that. Now, in the middle of the year, like with these new hires or even with the standard part-time employees, we can always determine, see what their status is partway through and get a forecast. So, for example, Lacey has been with us for 4 months, already forecasted out to be full-time. So if she continues on this trend for 8 more months, we'll need to offer Lacey coverage. There's a lot of 4-month ones in here. 3 months full-time. Here's one, Borna, 8 months, 775 hours, forecasted at part-time. But what this does is give you the ability to manage the process and to manage to some degree how many employees become full-time and that you need to offer coverage to. All right, so you've always got this at your disposal, being able to perform this analysis and help yourselves through a risk management process. And you can, typically these are done monthly, but you can really run them anytime you need to. Okay. So at the end of the day, or really at the end of the year, we're going to run a year-end process that's going to analyze all this data and produce the 1095Cs. And I'm just going to show you an example of one. Okay, so here's a 1095C. Got all the information filled in. You only need to add dependent information, covered individuals, if you're self-insured. Otherwise, don't need dependent information. Offer of coverage, it's a 1C if it's available. This just describes what information about the coverage and who's covered, dependents, and so on. The employee cost, you can see this is zeros here because if we look at line 16, this person is a 2D, they're in a non-assessment period until they get to September. Then they are a 2B, which is considered not a full-time employee. Don't really need to offer them coverage. As you go into the next year, this employee turns into a full-time employee, and we would offer coverage, or those attributes would change related to that. In this scenario, we technically don't need to produce a 1095C for this employee because they weren't considered eligible. But it's an example of what you can see. All right, so we've gone from uploading the data from Dynamics GP or whatever other payroll system you might be using, setting up the standard measurement periods and the initial measurement periods, setting up the ACA attributes for the plan, and then running some eligibility reports, and at the end of the day, producing the 1095C. So we've covered it full cycle there. All right, so kind of an obvious question. Why move forward with this solution? Number one, it's kind of no filter Friday, being a little bit blunt, but you're running out of time, and the fact that there's a very short window to get some things implemented so that you can be compliant with the Affordable Care Act. You've seen why this solution is a good answer because it covers everything that you need to do. Here's some testimonials, obviously, from some customers that are already using it. If you want to go out to our website there, which is integrity-data.com, we've got some videos, we've got the blog information there. We do have webinars that cover a lot of the same information that we've covered today, customer stories, documentation, of course, all the articles and the blog posts that we relate to or that we link to from Twitter. And so when you look at the situation and the fact that you need to be ACA compliant if you have 50 more FTEs, the time is short, which I've pointed that out several times. You need to make a decision on your strategy. I've showed you a good strategy, which is the Integrity Data ACA solution. If you're interested in that, you can contact us directly, which I'll put some contact information up here. Or you can go through your Microsoft partner. They'll be happy to help. If you're not a Microsoft Dynamics customer, you can feel free to reach out to us. Or if you were steered to the webinar by a broker or somebody else that you work with, they're obviously aware of our solution. But there's a lot of us out here that can help you, and by all means, please feel free to contact us. At this point, what I'd like to do is go ahead and try to answer some of the questions.
All right, so please do enter your questions now through the Q&A block you should see to the right of Dan's presentation. Dan, great job. Thanks very much for that. And do you want me to start sort of firing out the questions for you, or do you see them?
I see the questions, so I will just walk through those and answer those verbally.
Sure.
Okay, so John, what about Dynamics NAV? We have worked with a few NAV customers, so we can certainly pull that payroll data, or have you pull the payroll data and upload it. So certainly the system that we provide is completely, we call it payroll agnostic, so it doesn't matter what payroll system you're using. We've done implementations with customers using Dynamics GP, Dynamics AX, NAV, SL, ADP, QuickBooks, Paychecks, and all the rest. So good question from Tina. How do you determine if you have on average 45 employees but have turnover? The ALE determination, if you saw, goes across to the month. So if in January, if you have 52, January through, let's just say June, and then from June through December, you have 46. Your average is going to be 49 at that point, but employees are going to come in and out through that process. So if you had a full-time employee that left and then you fulfilled them, then that's that month-to-month calculation, and then that average is going to clean that up and produce an average for you over the course of the year. Okay, so Tina, as long as you're doing that correctly and terminating employees and have those termination dates, then that shouldn't push you over the 50-plus mark. Okay, Shirley has a question. Is it recommended to upload data monthly or how often? Monthly is kind of the standard. Some organizations are doing it every pay period. It really depends on what you're comfortable with. Some organizations now are doing an upload to get comfortable and train and see where they're at, and then they'll do another upload at the end of December once they finish their final pay period of the year, and then upload that data. So monthly is kind of the standard, I guess, but you can certainly do it more often. If you don't have any part-time employees, you could technically do it less often. I don't see any additional questions. If there are questions, let me put the contact information up. If you have additional questions, you can feel free to contact us. We'll be happy to help you through this and get your questions answered. And of course, if you'd like to move forward with the solution, again, the scheduling is we're doing pretty good so far, is getting everybody implemented. We anticipate a Black Friday type of situation in December and January where there's a little bit of a panic. Everybody's rushing in the door trying to get something in place, fighting over Tickle Me Elmo. That's the one I remember the most. But anyway, don't put yourself in that position, and don't put your organization in that position. Please go ahead and if you're going to move forward, and we obviously recommend do it quickly because the time is short, and we can certainly help you with that. Okay. Not seeing any other questions come through, so Jason, if you want to wrap up, I think we'll go ahead and wrap up the webinar.
All right, very good. Well, thanks a lot, Dan, for presenting today. Thanks also to our audience for your attention and for the questions that you submitted. We did record today's event as well. We'll be finding a way to make that available for you likely in the next few days here. And with that, we're going to end today's session. I will say thanks and have a great day.